The Blue Parakeet by Scott McKnight. So, the purpose of this little screencast is to just give you a really quick overview of what the Blue Parakeet is all about. We've had some confusion as we've gone about what exactly McKnight is looking to do. And really, in the first two-thirds of the book, he is really arguing for why this needs to happen and then giving us some definitions of what the story is all about. Um, Put simply, he is arguing that we need to understand the whole story, capital S story of the Bible, and see how that whole story weaves its way through Scripture anytime we are looking at how we're going to live out what's in the Bible. And so, without looking at the whole story and how God acts as well as what God says, we miss out. So, that's what this is going to be about. It's just chapter by chapter what's going on. Chapter 1. This is really just Christians pick and choose what we follow. We talked about it in a couple different ways about um, how we would pick a command to follow in one place and not to listen to the things right around it. We do it, we have to deal with that fact. Chapter 2, this talks all about tradition. And his end goal is to help us consciously understand our tradition so that we can read the Bible knowing what our tradition is, which allows us to A, read with some basis, that we're not just reading it however we'd like and going off whatever direction we want to go to. It also allows us to realize when there's a blue parakeet, something that doesn't fit our tradition, and instead of forcing the blue parakeet to become our tradition, it allows us to question what's going on. Chapter 3 goes through a couple of shortcuts on what lots of us use in order to read the Bible simpler. And because eventually he's going to get to having us read the Bible as a whole story, these shortcuts don't allow us to do that. Chapters 4 and 5. He's basically talking about how the Bible was made up. It's made up of a whole bunch of little wiki stories that were written for specific people in specific times, but all of them go together into the big story. Hey, I'm going to point this out here. I have a small s story on Story of God and Humanity. He always has that as a capital S, because there's a difference between the stories that make it up and the big story. Chapters 6 and 7. This is all about how we are God's people and we listen to God with the hope of developing a relationship with Him. That's the purpose of reading. We aren't reading for fact. We aren't reading for, he goes through a number of different things that people go to the Bible looking for. What we are looking for is a relationship with God. Chapter 8. Ultimately, that relationship, the interaction we have with the text, is that we are transformed. We are changed from the people we were into the new creation that God has made us to be. Chapter 9. Having gone through all of that, he now gives us more examples of how we pick and choose which scriptures we want to follow. For the study guide, you are looking at what we do with the Sermon on the Mount and how we follow some of it and don't follow other parts, because we are trying to get to that point of thinking through it consciously. Chapter 10 is that hope of developing a real pattern of discernment that helps us to decide what we're going to follow and what we aren't in a way that is reasonable and real rather than unthinking. Chapters 11 to 15. This is when he looks at the role of women in the church as far as how he reads it when he takes in the entire whole story. Because we read the Bible as a whole story, we are not content to take the easy way out. We're not content to just take scriptures that are proof text or scriptures that were even commands for specific times and places and say this automatically applies to everything. Instead, we work to understand God's view on a subject by how he works with his people throughout history. Now let's just make sure we're all clear here. Just because we read it as story does not mean we don't take commands at face value. When we when Jesus was asked what is the greatest commandment, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And he said, love your neighbor as yourself. He took the entire Old Testament Torah um, and summed it up with those two commands. We don't ignore that that's what he said. And in fact, when we take that, love God with everything you've got and love your neighbor as yourself, and we put that against the story over and over again, the big story, we are left with that is what God calls us to. Um, but we don't start from the place that says, hey, here's a command, so let's all do it right away. We say, we know we pick and choose. So now we look at, are we picking and choosing this for a good reason, or are our reasons faulty? So that's the book.